Hello, everyone. Doing another book review or vlog style for one of the books from the Sword and Laser Book Club. Specifically, see this comes with a proper camera. Um, Simon Yemen's Spear Cuts Through Water, and once again, NVIDIA broadcasts blue screen effect is mucking things up. I shall eventually have to figure out how to set up a a proper green screen in the space available, but that time is not now. So instead, the time is to talk about this book. This is a fantasy novel in, I would almost describe as the epic fantasy variety. Um, Epic in the sense of this is a story that is heavily involving gods and mythology and the divine and that sort of thing. Um, and what I think really makes this interesting to me, and like we go, oh, I'm not going to do my usual thing. I'm going to write out a review and then do a video version of it later. Make me go, no, I need to do a video review about this right away after I finish it. Is how this story is told. I have encountered books which have been told in the first person, in a combination of third person and second person, as in the case with the novelization of the third prequel film, Revenge of the Sith. This is different. This is a book that kind of goes through three narrative perspective modes. Now, I don't just mean this in the sense of first person, second person, or in the sense of um third or first, second, third person. In the sense of like the points of view in which the story is being told and what's going with it. On the one hand, you have our main core characters. The characters of June and Kima. June is the son of one of what are known as the Terrors, the three sons of this emperor of this land. They are called the Terrors for a reason. They are horrifically cruel beings, um, cruel people. Um, some very deliberately so in their cruelty. Others in a cruelty born out of neglect, where they are as much victims as anything else. Then we have and June is one of their children, the children of the first Terror. And then Kim, on the other hand, is basically a person without a people. Effectively, he describes himself as being of the Dware tribe. Um, Mentioned like, oh, like the ethnicity of the peoples involved in terms of what culture it's based on is kind of left up in the air. Um, it's not really doesn't feel like it's meant to be a real world analog or anything like that. The way that other books will have, okay, like this is a um author telling a story with it's a fantasy story with a culture that is meant to be a Afro fantastical story. Um, for example, like a Afro fantastical story, like for example with Marlon James and Black Leopard, Red Wolf. This doesn't feel like this isn't like that, but it is not operating in terms of the world it is crafting the conventional um, idiom of what we consider what Western fantasy or swords and sorcery fantasy or that sort of thing. Um, Admittedly, I'm not as familiar with Simon Jimenez as a author. So this really, I could be wrong. This could be actually a very Filipino inspired, Philippine history inspired work of fiction. Um, in this regard, because actually, like looking at some of the phrasing that is used for character names like grandfather or grandmother and that sort of thing. I could see that meaning to have a degree of Filipino uh, background to it. But I'm not familiar enough there with that necessarily to say yes, this is what he's doing. He is trying to do with um, the stories of the people of the Philippines and their history and that sort of thing. He's trying to do with that what was being done with Black Leopard, Red Wolf, or that sort of thing. So, what I mean is also in terms of how the story is being told, is this story goes all the way from first and third person all the way through the story. First person, second person, third person, all of it. If there was a fourth person, he'd probably be using that too. And that's because the story is a mix of frames to it within what perspective is being used. Third person perspective is what's used for the main story of um of Kima and of June. Their point of view, them going through the story of where they have rescued June has basically rescued this dying goddess figure, who is the parent, the mother of the terrors, and who she's also killed the emperor, and trying to take her to the coast so that so she may do a thing to basically save and preserve the world. And save the world sort of by restoring the balance of things. Um, so that all of that is that is first person. Second person is within the story. We have a story within the story, and that is a play that is being told, where the viewer, the reader, is witnessing a play that is being done in a very supernatural theater. I'd almost compare it to a certain degree. The place my brain goes is to the film the anime film Labyrinth Tale, uh, by which is the framing narrative segments directed by Rintaro, with this circus tent theater where within which we see these stories played out before us as the audience, um, in a very different way than something like Robot Carnival, where yes, it has that theme of the carnival, but we do not actually go within the carnival. We do not experience it within that carnival atmosphere. Um, Here we are in this ghostly theater where we witness this play being done, presented as um, the story of these characters. So we are both aware of, like, immersed in the story and seeing it from this third person perspective as the audience, but also in this degree of second person remove where we are aware of where we are in the theater and aware of our environment, the way that when you go to see a play, you are aware of the fact that the action that's happening on stage is not real. You see the curtains, you see the the artificia of the theatrical performance, of both in terms of the set dressing and that sort of thing, where even trying to go hyper minimalist in your stage production in its own way calls attention to the staging and the artificiality of that performance. And so we're seeing this from this perspective. And this also ties into the first person portion of the story as well, because occasionally within the third person segments, we will go into the first person of characters within the story, almost as with them serving as Greek chorus of the individuals on the ground level, of the ordinary people who are caught up in these epic affairs, where when we normally talk about Greek chorus, we think of Greek chorus speaking for the gods. Here we see Greek chorus not speaking as the voice of the divine, but as the voice of the people, the voice of those who are caught up in the midst of these affairs, and bringing to attention the human cost and human toll of what's going on, the human price that's being paid by the people for the avarice and vanity of the Emperor and the Terrors, but also in the similar context, um, the aftermath and consequences of what collective groups of people and major players are doing in the course of the story. But we're going to go back for a second, step away to the second person, because second person portion, because with the second person, we as the second person character, that the character whose point of view that is, the one who's addressed as you, spoken to as you, we are not a passive observer ourselves. We are not, it is not the actions being described and directed of a neutral, generic, ambivalent person. No, we are ourselves the second person character, the audience member, have our own history and our own backstory to this. And that story, we remember it, or I say, as the audience member remembers it, and thus, by extension, we as the audience, the reader, remember these elements. Because when a reader comes to a story, we do not come into it in a vacuum. We take something of ourselves with us. And in the same way, that applies to this story, where we see what the audience member brings with them to the narrative. And this matters because this the story within, like, the third person story, Jun and Kima's story, is mythology, is history, or history that is so old as to become myth within the culture of the audience member. And eventually a point comes within the story where all of these perspectives, like, well and truly combine. I don't want to give too much information into how and why that happens, but it is part of it a like, part of it feels like a never-ending story moment of Bastian realizing that no, the book is what's happening in the book is real to the people in the book, and he has an impact on it. Like, some of it is that. Some of it is um I almost want to think compared to the Julie Taymor version in book of Titus Andronicus, but in book form, with the character of the child who is brought in within the work and serves as witness to the events within it, but occasionally um, stepping into the scene every little bit now and then, but still this character serving as the audience perspective. Um, and it makes the story, on the one hand, really fascinating to listen to read. Um, but on the other hand, as I was reading this and looking over the conversation, the Sword and Lacer Book Club, there are people who bounced off of it because of how this narrative perspective and how these points of view are combined. And I totally get it. This is absolutely a point that can cause people to go, nope, this ain't working for me, brother. Um, I'm I'm having difficulty handling this, especially for people if you're trying to go through this with an audiobook, because I don't know, and I read the physical book version. So I don't know how well this played out in the audiobook. And, like, on the one hand, I want to go listen to it. I'd be interested to see how that turns out. On the other hand, I can see this being tremendously frustrating for me, depending on how the reader does this and what kind of reader you have. Um, like, a reader whose thing is they do the voices. Like with the audiobooks of Heir to the Empire and the Thrawn trilogy and that sort of thing, where the reader, or also gone into other Star Wars books, where he's able to go into the voices of Han and Leia and Luke and that sort of thing, and Thrawn and all of them. Like that, having that range of voices at your disposal works in your favor with the story, because you can, when you shift points of view, you can vocally shift your performance to reflect, now we are in this, beyond just the verbiage of now we're in the second person with the audience member, also for the first person for the various characters doing that as well. I almost think, honestly, that this is a book that would probably work better in terms of how the audiobook would go in the context of something like, um honestly, the graphic audio people, where take this as a full cast work and say, hey, you have your second person narrator. And second person narrator, you have your voices for Kima and June and various characters of the stage. And then a narrator providing stage direction. And maybe that narrator also kind of is the voice of the audience member, but slightly. And then having other actors drop in for the individual side characters that will show up in the first person perspective. A soldier at the gate, a merchant at a cart, a pilgrim on the road, that sort of thing. This is a story where I feel like more people, particularly those of the literary bent who like to read stories that challenge them in terms of how the story is told, that want to read a story not just to challenge them from their ideas, but challenge them in their in the form of narrative presentation, should be reading this. And a bit of a worry on my end is when I hear about that, when I think about that crowd, that is the crowd that is most likely to, it feels to me, to walk past the fantasy and science fiction shelves without taking a glance. And I am not the person, to be clear, who goes, oh, this isn't science fiction and fantasy. This isn't genre fiction. This is literature. I am not that guy. I am absolutely the opposite. I think that the literature people need to spend some time in the science fiction and fantasy sections, in the mystery section, in the romance aisle, in the western aisle. This is why I love works like podcasts like Shelved by Genre. And honestly, I kind of like, for good reasons, Shelved by Genre tends to be focusing on older works that have on long-established fan bases and have a long-established reputation within the fields of speculative fiction, fantasy, horror, and that sort of thing, and have had a significant impact, whether or in terms of authors or creators, like with Junji Ito when they did their Junji Ito unit, like with Ursula K. Le Guin, like with Gene Wolfe. But I really, really hope that this ends up on their radar, and maybe someday they go, let's do something a little more recent. And this month or maybe this couple of weeks, we're gonna cover The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And I think that book would absolutely be their jam. And I hope that I have caught your interest enough with the book that perhaps it will be your jam as well. If it is indeed your jam, it goes well with your speculative fiction fantasy peanut butter. There'll be a link in the doobly-doo on places where you can get it outside, of course, from in addition to your local libraries. Always support your local libraries. They are awesome places. Recommend checking it out and giving it a read. The links in the doobly-doo will also help support the podcast, the channel and podcast, and all my other stuff that I do. So, particularly since this was coming up will be coming out in November. So we're coming up on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, holiday shopping. You know the thing. So, again, I really liked The Spear Cuts Through Water. I recognize that this is a book that is very likely not for everyone due to the narrative stuff that it does. But that I was not bored. I was very engrossed by it. It took me a long time to read it, but I dug it. I had a blast reading it ultimately. So check it out.
you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Tossing me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.